Today, we're going to talk about conflict. Conflict. Not one of our favorite subjects in the world, but something that we deal with as a normal part of our lives. If we're in any kind of relationships, we're going to probably have conflict at some point or another. Most of us, if you're like me, we like to avoid conflict if we can. But if we're in a healthy relationship, conflict is something that is going to take place. It's going to take place in our friendships, in marriage, in parents with children, all kinds of relationships, in ministry, in work, in the workplace. And so this is something that we have to deal with on a regular basis. The challenge is, how do we handle or how do we work through conflict? Because when we have poorly handled conflict, that creates a lot of pain in our lives. When we have heartache and suffering, even violence, as we're seeing in the war next door, it's a conflict that erupted into war, was not solved in other ways. That's a very painful and poorly managed conflict that's going on in Ukraine. And yet we see all around us all kinds of violent crimes, uncontrolled rage, wars and riots between people groups and cultures and nations. But then what we're really concerned about is how it's affecting us in our lives and in our relationships around us. And that's what I would like for us to talk about today. And what I want to do is look at an incident that took place in Joshua chapter 22. Those of you that have been with us know we've been studying through the book of Joshua. Today's our last day in the book, but we're finishing with this story about an incident that almost erupted into a war. And so, what can we learn from this, from their experience and their mistakes and their successes that we can take away for ourselves? So Henry read for us the opening verses of this story. The historical situation is, as we've been looking at, Israel has been at war for the last 7 years. They have been taking land in the promised land that God had given to them. They've been fighting. They've defeated 31 kings. I mean, they've done a lot of amazing things together as a nation. But now they have peace on all sides. And so I want to show you a map because there's 12 tribes of Israel. 2.5 of them are going to settle on the right side. There's a blue line down the middle. That's the Jordan River. Hard to see, but it's there. There's a half tribe of Manasseh on the right. There's Gad in the middle and Reuben down below. That's 2.5 tribes out of the 12. Their land is that they're going to be taking is on the other side of the Jordan. So that's the geographics of it. And so now Joshua says to them, thank you, you've done a great job working together with us to take all of the other land. You've been faithful. I want you to remain faithful, to love God, to obey His commandments, but you're released to go. They had left their families on the other side of the Jordan 7 years earlier. They haven't seen their families in all this time. So you can imagine how happy they are to finally go back and take possession of their land. On the way, they stop right before the Jordan, and they build an altar. It's interesting how the author writes this story, because he does not tell us why they built the altar. He only tells us it's an altar, it's large in appearance, and then immediately takes us to the reaction of the other 9.5 tribes when they hear about this. And what is their reaction? We're going to war. Well, that seems kind of a strong reaction, doesn't it? So we need to try to understand this story a little bit to find out why, because it says in verse 12, when the sons of Israel heard of it, about the altar, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel gathered themselves at Shiloh to go up against them in war. Wow. That spiraled out of control in a big hurry when they heard about this. So it's interesting to me how, if you can imagine, they've been in the mindset of war for the last 7 years. Their answer to every problem was to go to war. Now they're transitioning into a time of peace. Who are we going to fight with if we don't have a common enemy? Oh, I know. We'll fight with each other. And that's what we start to see here, because they're going to have to figure out how to transition from wartime to peacetime. I found this quote from somebody that some of us know, Ron Summers. He was a pastor here a number of years ago. He wrote a book on the subject of conflict. The parts of it that I've read are very good. Here's a quote from him. He says, "Change often causes people to want to hold on to familiar roles or ways of doing things that have provided a sense of security. But old patterns do not always fit new realities." They knew what to do in wartime. They knew how to respond to problems. You take your weapons out and you start fighting somebody. But now it's time of peace, and that approach, that pattern, is not going to fit in the new reality, which is they're living in peace side by side with one another. So war is not the answer for everything. They were going to have to figure out how to relate to each other in a peaceful way. But we need to stop for a moment and talk about this altar, because you and I, we hear altar, and we're not getting ready for war. That does not elicit any kind of a response from us. Why does it elicit a response from them? Well, what is an altar, first of all? What is an altar? It's a place of worship. It's a place where we bring offerings and sacrifices in some kind of religious system. And same thing is true in Israel. They have an altar. And it's a place where we come to worship God. Well, that makes sense. But there's a big problem with what's happening with this new altar that's being built. Because God had said clearly there's only to be one altar in all of Israel. And only at this one altar can you come and offer sacrifices and offerings. So a second altar would be a direct violation of a command of God. Here's a command that's very specific. It's found in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 13. It says, "Be careful that you do not offer your burnt offering in every cultic place you see, but in the place where the Lord chose in one of your tribes. Then you shall offer your burnt offerings. There you shall offer, and there you shall do all I command you." Chapter 18, verse 1, God chose that place. It's in Shiloh. That's where the tabernacle is. That's where the altar is. That's the only one there's supposed to be in all of Israel. So now we can understand the reaction that these people would have. Because they're hearing altar, they're immediately making an assumption that this altar is being used as a second altar for offerings and sacrifices, and that's not okay. And so that's where they get this reaction. But the important thing we need to see here is that they are making an assumption. It's not based on facts. They still have yet to understand why they have decided to build this altar. The reason that they're absolutely concerned about this is because their history has shown how the sin of a few people can impact the whole people. Do you remember the sin of Achan? He's the guy that stole some gold and silver in Jericho and hid it for himself. One person broke the commandment of God, and the whole nation suffers a defeat in battle. 36 men lost their lives because of the sin of this one person. So these people are a little sensitive about what people are doing around them. Holiness, righteousness is important for everyone, and not just for a few. So, they get ready for war, but we need to remember the decision to go to war was based on an assumption. And that's what we need to think about. They heard something, it triggered their imaginations. They're not asking for more information, they're using their imagination and assuming that these 2.5 tribes are not doing what is right. And they're going to start making decisions based on this assumption. Now, I know that no one in this room has ever made an assumption in your entire life. Just try to walk through this together with me. Making assumptions. When we make assumptions, and especially when we make an assumption and assume the worst in a situation, this will always lead to misunderstanding and conflict, almost without fail. And can lead to division when we are not being careful about how we're looking at or receiving information. But here's some good news. There was enough wisdom among these 9.5 tribes that before they went storming off in war to pummel these rebellious people, the leadership thought, you know what, maybe, just maybe it would be wise for us to go check this out. So they send a delegation of 12 leaders to go and speak with these 2.5 tribes. But their whole time they're walking out there, as we'll see in a minute, what are they thinking about? Are they thinking level-headed thoughts? Not exactly. But what should they do? So can you see the situation? You've got a very troubling development in some part of the kingdom. It's not good. Everybody is talking and agreeing. This is not good. We've got to solve this problem. Everybody's talking about it. And now you're walking toward this place, and you're still talking about it, still reinforcing the assumptions, and you show up. And there the people are. And now you see the altar. What would be the healthy, good thing to do at this point? Ask some questions. Hey, I see you've built an altar. Why did you build this altar? What is the meaning of this altar? I think of one of the great examples is God himself. Remember when he came into the Garden of Eden and he came to Eve? He asked her an open-ended question. He asked, "What is this you have done?" Non-threatening, not, accusation. It's just an open-ended question that allows for a person to respond to your question and explain themselves. So if these leaders were, and these are the leaders, by the way, these are the ones that are supposed to know. They know the word, they have wisdom. How are they going to respond to this situation? Are they going to ask open-ended questions? Now listen carefully what happens next. chapter 22, verse 15 through 20. They came to the sons of Reuben and to the sons of Gad and to the half-tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead. And they spoke with them, saying, Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what is this unfaithful act which you have committed against the God of Israel, turning away from following the Lord this day, after building yourself an altar to rebel against the Lord this day? Is not the iniquity of pure enough for us, from which we have not cleansed ourselves to this day, although a plague came on the congregation of the Lord, that you must turn away this day from following the Lord? If you rebel against the Lord today, he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel tomorrow. If, however, the land of your possession is unclean, then cross into the land of possession of the Lord, where the Lord's tabernacle stands, and take possession among us. Only do not rebel against the Lord or rebel against us by building an altar for yourselves beside the altar of the Lord our God. Did not Achan the son of Zerah act unfaithfully in the things under the ban, and wrath fall on the congregation of Israel? And that man did not perish alone in all his iniquity. Oh, okay. Why don't you tell us how you really feel? Right? I mean, look at what, this is a textbook answer to how not to respond to conflict. All right? First of all, they started with an assumption. They rushed to a judgment. And then in these few verses, they did unmitigated attacking, accusing, and judging the motivations of these tribes. There's not one open-ended question in the lot. If it was formed as a question, it was formed as a weapon. Listen to all the words. And notice, if you sit down and count the number of you. And we all know how this works. When we start a conflict, and we have people going back and forth, you, and then you, and everybody is pointing fingers and saying you. That's a bad sign of a conflict. It happens over 6 times in these few verses. Listen to all the words they're using. Unfaithful, committing against the God, turning away from the Lord. You're rebelling. The sin of pure, by the way, was something that happened years ago. Now they're reaching into the past. Let's just find everything they've done wrong. I'm throwing in the hole. Here's a kitchen sink. Here, take this. And they're throwing all of the sins that they've engaged in or have known about in their recent history and bringing this to bear. Accusations, turning away, rebellion, angry, unfaithful. None of this language. Well, let me just ask you, has this ever happened to you? When you have made a decision, perfectly legitimate decision about anything in your life, and then someone else comes along with an assumption and begins to make accusations, one after another, after another, after another. Ever happened? I know you've never done this to anyone else, but perhaps someone has done this to you. There's 2 things I want to consider. How does this make us feel? And how do we typically respond? How do we feel when somebody's making assumptions and then accusations against us? How does that make us feel? Not good. I can feel angry. Ever felt angry? Do you feel defensive? You ever feel defensive? Yes. We can withdraw and avoid. That's a favorite one of mine. Where's Paul? I don't know. He's offended. he's offended, he's hurt, he's misunderstood, he's rejected, and he disappears from the conflict. Okay, others will retaliate and fight back, because how then do we respond to when we are being accused and assumed of? And it's wrong. Everything being said is wrong. Well, we become defensive. We withdraw and avoid. We can retaliate and get even and start throwing kitchen sinks back the other direction. Oh, well, you say that, well, what about this? And remember when you said that, and remember, and it just becomes, and what happens is we're escalating. The conflict escalates when we react in pain and respond in some defensive manner. Any of this, are you identifying with any of the stories so far? We're here, okay, all right. To be able to respond to this situation in a calm and peaceful way is very difficult to do. Is it not? It's very difficult to do. So let's look and see how these 2.5 tribes respond to this onslaught of negativity. Let's read chapter 22, verses 21 and 22. Then the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh answered and spoke to the heads of the families of Israel. The mighty one, God, the Lord. The mighty one, God, the Lord. He knows, and may Israel itself know, if it was in rebellion or if in act of unfaithful act against the Lord, do not save us this day. So they cry out to the Lord. And you know what they do? They actually agree with them. If everything that you're saying right now about us, your assumptions, your accusations are actually true, kill us right now. We actually agree with you. If we're rebelling against God and unfaithful to God, kill us now. Because we agree with you if that's what we were doing. Just one small problem, but hey, just so you know that none of what you're saying is right. If it was, however, we would agree with you. Well, what they're doing is finding common ground. As difficult as it is, they're looking for the one small thing they say, hey, I agree with you. I actually agree with you. I agree with you that if what we're doing is what you say, we would do the same thing. We would respond in the same way. So they find common ground. And then they continue in their response, verses 24 through 27. But truly we have done this. Now they're going to explain why they did this. But truly we have done this out of concern, for a reason, saying, in time to come your sons may say to our sons, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan, the river, a border between you and us. You sons of Reuben and sons of Gad, you have no portion in the Lord. So your sons may make our sons stop fearing the Lord. Therefore we said, let us build an altar not for burnt offerings or sacrifice. Rather, it shall be a witness between us and you, and between our generations after us, that are to perform the service of the Lord before him with our burnt offerings and with our sacrifices and with our peace offerings, so that your sons will not say to our sons in time to come, you have no portion in the Lord. Therefore we said, it shall come about, if they say this to us or to our generations in our time to come, then we shall say, see the copy of the altar of the Lord, which our father made, not for burnt offering or for sacrifice. Rather, it is a witness between you and us. they explain why they built the altar without attacking or counterattacking. They explain in a very calm and even way, this is why we chose to build this altar. It's not for sacrifice, it's for a witness. It is, I mean, we were just worshiping in a worship service with you a week ago. You know our hearts. We've been fighting together with you for 7 years. We love the Lord our God just the same as you do. It's not about us that we built this altar. Our concern is for those who come after us, our children. We don't want them to come to the border and then have your sons look at them and go, what are you doing? You're on the other side of the Jordan. You don't belong to us. Oh, yes, we do. When we want to make sure that future generations understand that our sons know that we belong to the Lord over here, and that your sons know that we belong over here. That's why we built this altar. It's for all of us. That's the explanation. The wonderful thing about it was the 9.5 tribe, the leaders, they heard this and go, oh, okay. And they accept it. They receive it. They admit, by the way, that they were wrong. That's another good point to good conflict resolution. I was wrong. I made assumptions. I made accusations that I was wrong. I'm sorry. Really helpful in conflict, it turns out. One of the things I just want to reflect, as we reflect on this story, is to understand that before, the sons of Israel were doing everything together. They crossed the Jordan together. They built up a pile of stones of memorial together, 12 stones from each tribe. They got circumcised together. They worshiped the Lord together. They fought battles week in and week out, year in and year out, together. But now the situation was changing. Now they were going to be in a time of peace, and they were not all going to be together. They're going to be spread out over the whole land. They're going to now have to learn how to communicate with each other in a different way, because they're not all going to be sitting in the same room. They're going to be spread out, and the territory is the size of Moldova, and you can imagine. And we don't have the cell phones and the text messages and all that. They're going to have to figure out how to stay connected to each other. So the old patterns of relating aren't going to work anymore. They have to come into the new reality. One of the things that I thought about was, could this tribe who had built this altar send somebody back and to say, hey, we're building an altar and here's why? I mean, they could have done that, but you know what? They were so new in this whole new peace thing that they probably weren't even realizing. This is what happens when things change in our families. When a married couple has children, all of a sudden, everything changes in terms of communication. You have less time together. There's more challenges because you're trying to raise a child. You're going to have to change the way that you're communicating with each other. Or it could be in a work situation where you've been on a team working together and then you get promoted to the team leader. Well, now that means it's a change in your dynamic, in your relationship with other people. And you're going to have to adapt and make some changes. So these are things that we need to be thinking about in terms of what is happening in our lives and what is causing conflict, especially if we're seeing it on a consistent basis in a specific relationship or in a specific situation that we find ourselves. What are some of the things that what has changed? what's going on. For example, we have gone through, all of us, through this COVID business, this pandemic. That changed a lot about the dynamics of communicating. We couldn't even meet together for a period of months. And even when we did, we're wearing masks. That changed the dynamics, made it more difficult for us to communicate. We had to figure out new ways to communicate. And then we get this war, creating all kinds of uncertainty for all of us. And again, we're struggling with, we're all reacting to it differently. And so we need to have grace and mercy for one another, recognizing we're going through a lot. We've been through a lot, and we continue to go through a lot of life changes, right? He's just sitting here in Moldova. And we need to have grace for ourselves and for others. I just want to look at this and summarize. Think about a conflict or a relationship where you tend to have conflict on some kind of a regular basis, and start to think through some of the things we can take away from this chapter. What did they go through, and what can we get and learn from them? How can we resolve conflicts? Number one, give another person the opportunity to explain themselves. Stop making assumptions. Start asking questions, open-ended questions that will allow the other person to communicate what's going on and why are they doing what they're doing. Stop making assumptions of one another. That's a huge step in the right direction in terms of reducing conflicts in our relationships. Secondly, is to find common ground. Look for anything that you can say, hey, you and I are thinking the same thing about that. It could be as simple as we're sitting down and we're drinking the same kind of coffee. Hey, look, we're drinking the same kind of coffee. Hey, we've got something in common. It's like a sliver. It's like a little piece that you can say, okay, that's something that we're sharing in common. Start there. Start there, because that will take a confrontation and conflict and turn it towards a collaboration and a coming alongside, working together. Look for common ground. And when you're finally given the opportunity to speak for yourself, explain yourself without attacking or counter-attacking. This is the hardest part. When somebody's going, you, with double fingers, you see how I did 2 fingers, more strong that way, and you're getting this, it's really difficult to explain in response without attacking in kind. Stop using the you phrases and start speaking about I. And share yourself. I feel this. I'm hurting. I'm scared. I'm worried. This is how I feel about this situation. And I'm sharing that without blaming or blame shifting or attacking. I'm just trying to express myself that you understand me. And then one of the other things is to admit when we are actually wrong. I still love that sketch, a Happy Days sketch that I showed one time, a video where the guy just could not say that he was rude. I'm rude. He could not say the word wrong. I am wrong. Learn how to say, I am wrong. Don't trip over that word. Communicate it clearly. You know what? I made an assumption. I'm attacking you, and I'm wrong. Please forgive me. I hear you, I hear the truth, and I receive it. Boy, what a difference that makes when we're willing to admit that we are wrong. Next is give relationships the priority. Let that person know this relationship matters to me. I'm not just trying to win the war here. I'm not just trying to win the battle. Prove that I'm right. Truth is truth. We need to come to find the truth. But don't sacrifice the relationship. Let the people know that they matter. Maintain that relationship. Build up that relationship in non-conflict periods. That's useful too. If you have something else, that shared experience of good that we're doing for one another. And the last one I add is to respond in a timely manner. This is the one that gets me every time. Conflict starts, a disagreement's happening, and Paul, withdraws and avoids. Withdraw, avoid, withdraw, avoid, disappear, quiet. Where's Paul? I don't know. And I just wait. Okay, I'm going to wait. Maybe this thing will work itself out. I won't have to engage. I won't have to say any of these other things, because there's a lot of things to try to remember. Maybe if I just ignore it, it will somehow go. It doesn't go away, folks. And the longer you wait, the worse it gets. It can just compound it and makes it harder. Even though these 9.5 tribal leaders, when they came, they didn't do a very good job. They are assuming and doing all kinds of verbal stuff. But we give them this. They came. They addressed it immediately. They did not let it simmer and go unaddressed. They addressed it. That's huge. We could take conflict, and just by approaching it in a timely manner, keeps it smaller, doesn't let it grow and multiply, because these things have a tendency to do that. They take on a life of their own. Okay? So these are just some of the things that come out of this chapter. It's incredible what we can find here. We're digging around. There's a lot to be had in terms of how to engage conflict, which is a regular part of all of our lives. So it's not about how to avoid conflict, but rather how do we walk through conflict in a way that will bring resolution and healing and wholeness in a relationship. If we take these steps, will we remove conflict? No. But we will do a better job of dealing with it when they come up. And really the key to all of these is communication. Communication. Speaking on a regular basis and addressing things and really in a timely manner is the best thing. And so just in closing, there's one person that you have responsibility for, and that's you. I can't make you do any of this stuff in relationship to conflict. I can only do this myself. Every one of us has to decide for ourselves. Am I going to come to the Lord and say, Lord, I'm struggling with conflicts on multiple fronts. I seem always to be in this issues and struggles. God, help me to grow in the area of how to do a better job of processing conflicts with others. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what I am going to do. And that is to be a better communicator, to put value on our relationship, to respect and honor you by trying to follow some of these steps.